I'm Lou Lai, Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer at Manifesto, and in this episode of Leaders with Purpose, I'm so excited to be joined by Josephine Chanter, Deputy Director of the Design Museum. We hear about navigating change and transformation over 2 decades at the Design Museum, what it means to show up as a present leader, creating a safe space for your teams to flourish, challenge the status quo, and make decisions on what the next 10 years for the Design Museum look and feels like for their audiences, with a really exciting audience strategy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Amazing. So you have had a really amazing, sorry to big it up, journey into the culture sector, from political lobbying to PR. So would you mind just sharing a bit of a brief kind of timeline of how you ended up as the Deputy Director at the Design Museum?
Yeah, it's always interesting to look back. You sort of see the patterns and the logic, retrospectively. But I did always kind of start out as a massive generalist. I'm interested in everything and everyone. So people started to specialise, at university or their careers. I continued to be just interested by a huge range of different subjects, different ideas, different possibilities. So when I was at university, I was lucky enough to get an internship in a state legislature in upstate New York. Fell in love with politics, realised that I might be able to change things, make a difference. But I wasn't studying politics. So when I graduated, there was an awful lot of people who had been studying politics who were also competing for the same jobs that I wanted. So I ended up at a political lobbying agency. And that's where I really started to understand communications and actually how important and influential the media and public opinion and communications and influencing really is. So I was there for, I think, about 2 or 3 years and learned an incredible amount, but realised that the people, the clients and the people that were employing us as an agency didn't necessarily align with what I believed and what I thought. And this often wasn't a kind of a small disparity. It would be like, oh my God, if I do my job well today, people are going to die type feeling, which, day in, day out is really difficult. And it became quite a complex kind of moral maze. So it started a big period of reflection for me in terms of, what do I really care about? What's really important to me? What do I really want to spend my actual time doing? And that's when I realised culture. Culture was the thing that I'd always loved. Again, it's got the kind of the range, it brings in people, it brings in themes, ideas. It's as expansive a subject as it can be. So I decided to start looking for opportunities, and I was hugely lucky to get a break at the National Gallery. They were actually looking to recruit from outside the sector, which is quite unusual, particularly at that time, 25 years ago. But they were really looking for someone who could come in and bring in a different skill set from a different industry. And in fact, maybe who might, shake things up a bit. And I love that kind of brief. So I was like, brilliant, change, let me at it. So the incredible Claire Goff gave me a role in the press office there. And immediately I was completely amazed by how this institution worked and operated, and the process and how sort of really quite slow and ponderous it was at this time. I'm sure things have completely changed now. And I was really able to come in and sort of suggest that maybe we could do things a little bit differently. So that was a really exciting, pivotal shift. And as many people know in the cultural industries, once you're sort of in the sector, it's then much easier to get another role, to move on and to find your next step.
Amazing. So that sort of blank sheet of paper challenge and transformation. So talk about your current role at the Design Museum. Deputy Director of the Design Museum, that feels big, ambitious, and maybe a little bit of pressure, but it sounds like something you would really relish.
Yeah, it's a fantastic role, partly because the subject nature itself, design, it's always changing, always exciting, full of creative problem solvers. What better subject matter do you have to work with? The organisation itself is relatively young. Founded in 1989, so we like to say we're still in that startup.
Younger than me.
Yeah, we're still in that kind of startup phase.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of dynamism and energy, and in fact, defining what a design museum can be, because there aren't that many design museums in the world. There were even fewer when we started. So in many ways, we get to define the genre and define alongside with our public and our professional practice, what is design, what matters, what engages audiences, how can we have impact, and that's shifted over the 2 decades that I've worked there, and that's a constant source of interest and excitement and energy.
Amazing. So 2 decades, 20 years, which you're celebrating this year with something more than a mantelpiece clock, which we've discussed earlier, which is amazing. So you will have had a number of personal and professional kind of almost like transformations of your own in that time. Like, it'd be great to kind of hear about a few examples of how that experience has been from you, from, we spoke about being a peer, being a manager, to suddenly, the buck stops here, I'm the leader, so I guess people are looking to me for something different.
Yeah, and when I started off in the organisation, it was in the communications team. And I do think being in a communications team and learning those skills do help you develop a kind of leadership trajectory. I think you get to understand how an organisation works across the different elements. You're often, in rooms where you're having to make quite big decisions and big calls about things that are going to have, very serious, visible impact. So the ability to be able to influence and engage, I think, is always there for communications professionals, which is quite exciting. So when I started, the museum was really quite small. We had about 120,000 visitors a year. And quite soon, a new director started with the remit to find bigger premises and establish the museum as a much larger cultural centre. So again, the communications team is a huge part of developing that messaging and the capital campaign and that sort of piece. So as the program for the museum grew, I was able to develop my role and the responsibility within it to be, head of communications and the capital, particularly for the capital project, and really ensuring that we were going to raise £83 million and move a museum and open and reach over 500,000 visitors. So the challenge was there, and it was really about stepping into it. And I was hugely lucky to have a leadership team that really believed in my capabilities and really supported me. And I've been hugely fortunate to have, a number of people across my career who've really championed me to trust myself and believe that I can do more than what I'm currently doing, and that I just need to think differently and see. And I think it's important, you have to be able to see that shift. And you have to know what that looks like. And I've had leaders who've been really open with me to show me what that looks like. And I've tried to do that with the people that I lead as well. You don't want to hold on to leadership tightly and, sort of crush it. It's like, I want everyone to lead. The more leading everyone does, the easier and more, more enjoyable my situation is going to be. So, come with me on the journey, take responsibility, own things, make decisions, believe in those decisions, and be really open about when you got it wrong.
And so in terms of that sort of leadership and kind of helping, people in your teams or wider organisation, kind of team members, how does sort of being vulnerable then kind of show up for you? So yes, kind of owning when things go wrong, like how have you kind of managed or navigated kind of those kind of situations?
I think being really present, and I try and be quite unhierarchical as well. So I work with people across the organisation to solve problems. Just because you're in quite a junior role in the organisation doesn't mean you don't have a really important problem to solve that could be really impactful for the museum. So I try and connect across the organisation at different levels, and really listen and be really open, and to be present and supportive, to show how we could do things differently, or we could improve the situation, or make a difficult decision. And I think that's I guess my sort of style of leadership. To be visible and to be present.
Real. And I think that sort of presence, and that doesn't need to be kind of like physical presence, it's kind of like showing up in the right forums, or kind of, I guess, holding space, particularly when you are owning decisions that maybe won't be popular with everyone, but kind of knowing that that's the right path for the organisation. In your sort of kind of leadership journey, how have you managed the sort of the different hats? So you represent your directorate or the area of immediate responsibility, and then you walk into a room with other executive leaders and you're having to make a different decision for the organisation, which might not kind of be in line with kind of your kind of team or directorate. Like, how have you sort of navigated being able to kind of hold that different type of leadership space?
I think I tend to be very kind of outcome focused.
Okay.
And I do think the how is very important. So, how the message lands, how people understand things, why this decision being made. And so it's, an overused phrase, but taking people on the journey, but taking the time to explain, and where a decision has been changed, or things weren't able to proceed in the way that somebody thought they were going to. As much as you can, being transparent and open, and just taking people through that the thinking enables them just to take on board that change, or that complexity, or that challenge.
And in 20 years, that's a lot of change and transformation to continue to kind of cycle through.
Yeah.
And some of the sort of conversations we've had with leaders is around kind of their team's resilience to kind of change and managing ambiguity and uncertainty. And I didn't know if you've kind of experienced that kind of changing over the sort of 20 years at the Design Museum around people's kind of ability to kind of adapt to change and be open to that ambiguity more.
Absolutely. I think, there's almost constant change in the way we work now, the way that the world, technology, expectations, museums, everything is changing at quite a pace. And I think people, it does affect people's ability to be able to enjoy their jobs, and to deal with workloads, and to cope with what is being asked of them. I think setting a clear vision for where you're heading is really important. And we recently went through a process at the Design Museum of renewing our vision, and we do have a hugely passionate workforce who are really committed to what the Design Museum is about and what it might be able to do. So we really wanted to capture that and codify it. We're really we've really done some work to shape that, and that then helps people understand why things are developing the way they might be, or they have to dig particularly deep, or take things in a direction that doesn't feel comfortable. But I think, again, putting the time in to really shape and support that change, with your immediate team and with the wider team, is really important. And communicating it really well. We borrowed some of Margaret Calvert's road signage kind of typography to do like a road sign about where the museum is headed, and it just sort of captures some of that design process, as well as the direction that we're heading in, and those sorts of ways of bringing people, bringing a mission alive for people is really important. You need to invest the time and the energy and the creativity to do that. Actually applying creativity that the cultural sector does so well to change management, makes absolute sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we definitely see that a lot with organisations we work with, particularly around kind of vision and strategy. So some of the sort of work and frameworks that we use talk about open strategy. So like actually working out in the open, co-creation, being clear where decisions are and aren't being made. And so there's opportunities to input, but actually, certainly there's some decisions or lines in the sand that will sit, outside of a larger kind of team forum. But like you say, like literally the signposting of this is where we're going, like actually conceptually really kind of motivates teams and helps them kind of feel like they're part of this and they have an option to contribute. I'm imagining the engagement was pretty high because you've got that sort of passion for the work and the sort of vision, but how did the engagement what kind of forms did it take?
So we started off, as with every good strategy, with a survey, to take the temperature across the whole of the organisation. And then at different levels in the organisation, we had away days and workshops to really dig into what it was that we'd found. And so it was very much a kind of unearthing, I think, of the vision and the mission that was kind of latently there. And then really it was a process of refining and distilling, because what you want is something really clear and really usable. So again, like making that as condensed and as clear as possible was a process really that I think the exec kind of took it through, but with input from, the whole of the management team. So yeah, it was a kind of a layered process.
Yeah. And what role did kind of external insight and input and data, particularly around kind of audiences, customers, visitors, what were you sort of bringing in as sort of inspiration and data points?
So we just embarked on a whole audience development strategy piece, which is really exciting. So we actually did the strategy first, and then through that lens, we're looking at, where we're going to go in terms of developing our audiences. So we've just commissioned a whole review, which is really exciting, and we will have that back in September. So it's another kind of foundational piece of work, which will really help set a lot of the kind of activity for the next 3 to 5 years.
Amazing. And that's sort of, I could sense your excitement about the audience piece, and that's definitely kind of at the heart of lots of cultural organisations that we're sort of working with at the moment. And one of the big challenges is around kind of audience engagement, like navigating a new kind of almost comms, media, landscape attention kind of sort of piece of audience engagement, but also diversifying and reaching new audiences. And there's lots of, I think, ambition to reach younger audiences, making sure that we're bringing diverse kind of backgrounds through. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the audience, kind of, I guess, how you're engaging audiences at the moment and how that shows up for the Design Museum?
Yeah, I think as a museum, we have this way of changing our practice through our programme. We feel we've evidenced it on several occasions that how we change as an organisation is, not by saying we're going to do something, creating a PowerPoint, whatever it may be. It's actually doing programme really shifts who we are, because that's when we go deep into something and really understand it. So that's what we've been thinking about in terms of diversifying our audience, like what we actually do and where we actually put our resource and our time and our money, i.e. through our programme, because we're so programme-led, is the starting point. So we've been really looking at that in terms of who is represented, and that's and who is going to engage. So thinking about ideas and ways in that can have the broadest possible touch points. And that can be quite challenging for organisations. I've developed something that no one likes to hear, but it's basically like a McDonald's Happy Meal test. Would this ever be on a McDonald's Happy Meal? Like, that's the kind of broad understanding and reach that will allow you to, connect with a mass market. It's not the end point. The end point is ideally inspiring a whole new generation of people to study and become designers and to design a better world. But the starting point is meeting people with something that is familiar, potentially something that they're really passionate about already, or something that connects with them in terms of nostalgia. And then we can take them on a design journey. And that's the skill and the art, is that, that journey. But that, I think, meeting people where they are has become really important to us as an organisation. And, that's been a big shift for, us in terms of programme, in terms of what we think of as a design museum or what a design museum could be. But, we're now, reaching huge numbers of audience. I mean, our Tim Burton exhibition had 260,000 visitors. It took our membership up to 10,000 members. We've got this engaged audience that we can go back to with different ideas, different ways in. And so how we continue to nurture and develop that audience is I think the challenge. We now understand how to connect. It's like, how do we hold on to?
Definitely. And that really talks to a theme in piece of research that we did, that you were part of, which we call the loyalty loop.
Yeah.
So you've done all the work. They're like, okay, this is for me. You've met me. And then they almost like, how do they become advocates, ambassadors?
Yeah.
They, become part of your brand ecosystem and your comms.
We've got 5 key strategic objectives, and one of them is just about building loyalty.
Yeah.
Also, because loyalty, I think, as a principle, and I think lots of data now shows this, is on the decline.
Yeah.
People have never been more fickle. So, everything's available to you. You can switch, you can chop, you can do this, you can, why should you? The world's, everything is just available and out there at a touch of a button. So how do you build a meaningful relationship with an audience now and hold on to them? I think it's never been more difficult. So, that's got to be the challenge. And I think you've just got to be better and more important and more relevant, and that will ultimately connect with people.
And is one of the sort of hopes for the audience piece of work is that then everybody can embody, and that thread runs through everything in the organisation, because you can draw it straight back to that insight, the need, or behaviour that is being kind of identified.
Exactly. I mean, we've always been quite an audience-led institution because we're essentially self-funding.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of time for pet projects or vanity. We need to get people to engage with the museum, enjoy it, and, spend their hard-earned cash with us in order to continue and to do the work that we do. So we really, we've always been very audience-focused. And in fact, my role shifted in a big way when I went on maternity leave, and I was head of communications, and the co-directors at the time created a role of director of audiences and said, look, we want you to come back into this role, and we want you to be there, and we want you to be involved in programming, and we want audiences to really be at the heart of the museum. So I was on my maternity leave, brain in baby world, and I was just like, right, okay, that sounds good.
Bring it on.
Had this kind of moment of, can I do this? What does this mean? Total sort of self-doubt. And I was really fortunate to be, I put a kind of message out, to the universe to say, help, I'm going to need some support to kind of think this through. And I was very lucky that Alex Birch in the Natural History Museum came back and said, oh, I can help you with that. So, and she did a sort of series of phone calls with me just before I came back from maternity leave. And it was great. It just allowed me to verbally process, get my head back in the game. And, I was able to really start and shift the organisation and move things forward.
Yeah. Just day one, boom, go. I'm ready. I've prepped. I've had my mentoring.
And I think it's so much about your kind of headspace. Even though I wasn't ready and there was still chaos and confusion and self-doubt, I'd sort of talked myself into that belief. And I think, hopefully most people, with the right support can really do that. So I would really encourage people to just go and ask for help. It's amazing how generous people can be, actually, and want to support and want to help you reflect and grow and develop. And I think that was like 3 conversations on the phone, and it was just transformational.
I mean, I definitely share the kind of the value of mentoring, and particularly for women in leadership roles. And throughout my career, I've had access to many women who are able to be the mirror back to you, because you just can't see some of the things that they can see in you, and you don't think that you can do, X or Y. In terms of like mentoring kind of within the sort of cultural sector. So you obviously put a call out, and Alex kind of stepped in and said, yep, I'm here for this. What's access to mentoring, networking, community spaces like for leaders in the sort of cultural sector?
I think there's room for development. I think there are people who are kind of willing to help, particularly on a kind of informal basis, and give advice, be that mirror, as you say, step in. But I'm not sure we necessarily prioritize it and make the time. I think particularly as kind of female leaders, we can be very task orientated and also very people orientated, but that doesn't necessarily reflect back on creating that time for your development and looking at your practice and your leadership. So it's something I would encourage myself to do, but also you're always giving yourself advice when you're giving other people advice. But yes, so but creating that space and time, and seeing that as as an investment, and also for organizations to see that as an investment. The more resilient and effective your leadership is, that's going to have massive returns for you as an organization.
It's interesting that like you were saying, the sort of advice, like I would help someone over helping myself, like that is just in my nature.
Yeah.
But I think it's easy as, there's maybe a perception that the more senior you get, the less kind of coaching or mentoring that you might need. And I don't know, I kind of feel like, no, the opposite. The more that you kind of change roles, that you're having to lead in new worlds that we've never experienced before. Like, imagine the concept of AI and design, suddenly it's like, how is this changing the face of our world and our kind of realities? And so I don't know if you sort of had any reflections of, as you've evolved through different kind of roles and leadership journeys, how, the importance of coaching and mentoring and, support is really needed.
I think it's massively important. And I do tend to identify people within my circle who I know have particular skill sets, and ones that maybe are quite different or kind of complementary to mine. So I will, when I'm facing a difficult decision or want something around, positioning or, certain things, like there'll be certain people I'll be able to go to, and I know they'll give me like a fantastic point of view. So I think you can build that circle for yourself and just be aware of, who you have in your network, who will give you that different point of view.
Actually, that circle is really interesting. Speaking to someone recently, they spoke about they've constructed their own like mini board.
Yeah.
And like they've got different, like you say, you have like different board members. Like if I need someone who's going to just tell me how it is, this is the person I'm going to. And you kind of need to make sure like you say, you've got that circle of diverse, different perspectives. No one's really sugarcoating stuff, but they are absolutely providing that different kind of viewpoint for you. Like I can't attest to that more. And I will say, it's predominantly like women that I have around my sort of mini circle of trust that I've built, but also some really great kind of champions and cheerleaders of kind of male leaders who've really pushed me in my career, which I've been grateful of. But we spoke about navigating leadership as a woman and how that experience can be quite different. And it will continue to be. And there are some systemic barriers that are in place. What's been your experience of being a women leader in the cultural sector, and kind of what that's meant in terms of how you needed to show up, potentially the expectations of you or that you've put on yourself?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to look at leadership through a gender lens. And I think undoubtedly there are still very strong perceptions that you're constantly encountering, and expectations of yourself as well. It seems to me that like quite often female leaders have to put in a huge amount of just work, to feel like either they own their place at the table, or that people recognize them for being there. So there does seem to be a kind of imbalance in how men and women can show up in a leadership environment. And it's something that I try and balance in my own nature, between understanding that leadership can just be about charisma, about influence, or about persuasion. It doesn't always have to be about having the most amount of research, the most amount of work behind you, the best paper. That I think understanding that leadership can look a lot of different ways, and understanding that who you're trying to influence is really important. So you need to lead in slightly different ways for different audiences.
And with sort of some of the things you referenced was around, oh, can I do this? I don't know. And, I've definitely kind of been in those situations. And we spoke a little bit about kind of governance and boards. And I was talking today about trusteeship. So I was a first-time trustee, coming to the end of my second term. So, 6 years ago, never in a million years did I think, gosh, what the hell, what have I got to offer? Why would anyone? And I had many people contact me saying, Lou, you need to be a trustee and this is why. And it really took a lot of kind of encouragement. But I imagine I'm not alone in being a woman, also a woman of colour from, a certain background, that makes you feel like perhaps that's not a space for you, particularly formal kind of board settings. And I don't know what your experience is of kind of interfacing with kind of boards and that kind of governance piece, and how, we can be sort of tackling, equality, but also equity there. And I don't just mean from a gender place as well.
Yeah, I sometimes think the boardrooms, are set up to be intimidating spaces. They're not set up to be welcoming and collaborative and supportive. And there's almost some sort of idea that there's like a test kind of involved, which seems, the wrong way. It doesn't feel like, a values-led way of approaching leadership and governance. And I think boardrooms are going to change. And I think they are changing. And I've even seen that, over the, 20 years I've been at the museum. And I think it's much more about a shared sense of purpose, to return to our theme. And we just need to think about how we can create structures whereby creative and people who don't necessarily see themselves on boards have the time, have the opportunity to get involved. And that might be, shadowing. It might be different ways of recruiting to boards, different ways of inputting and structures. You need somebody to read all of the papers, but the other people can bring different skill sets and challenges and ideas. So I think it's something that we want to be constantly looking at and reviewing, to see how we can design better governance. It always comes back to design.
The thread will forever remain design. Absolutely. So you shared a really wonderful early childhood memory about what shaped your kind of view of leadership, and it was your father. And I would love if you're happy to kind of share kind of how that kind of has shaped your kind of view of what leadership, authority kind of, meant.
Yeah, I was thinking, ahead of this podcast and talking to you about where do you get your sense of what leadership looks like?
Yeah.
And I think I said to you, like, I'm not wearing a big man shirt, but
I was surprised.
I do like to wear a kind of big man shirt to work because, my dad wore a shirt to work every day. He was principal of Brixton College, and his philosophy there, he wasn't, he's passed away now, but I'm sure he won't mind me saying, he wasn't a particularly strong academic, but he was really good at bringing people together and giving people opportunities. And that really characterized his leadership. And one example of this was they had a problem with intruders coming into the college all the time. So he organised a football match between the intruder 11 and the staff so that they could meet and finally, understand each other and, come to sort of resolution on how they were going to manage, entry to the building. So I love that kind of creative problem solving of, we've got a situation, how can we look at this differently to bring people together, to do something positive, to create, positive change, rather than, tightening our security or, whatever, there would be 100 negative ways to kind of deal with that would just reinforce that situation. So constantly thinking how can we lead people to make better decisions?
So decision making comes up a lot in terms of leadership challenges around kind of autonomy, empowerment, accountability, responsibility. And so as a leader, and you spoke a lot about being present, giving clarity, kind of owning stuff. How have you kind of created a sense of empowerment for your team, of decision making and you mentioned around showing, not just telling, which I love as a concept and is definitely something that, we explore with lots of leaders, particularly when we're going through change.
Yeah. I think it's really important to give people autonomy and to, as part of that process, to try and coach them into that decision-making space. I think a huge amount of decisions can be devolved as long as it's done, within a sensible structure. So I think it's something I sort of quite naturally do. I don't have to, think about it that much. So I'm constantly kind of encouraging and helping teams to take on that ownership and leadership and make those decisions. I think sometimes one of the challenges I encounter in that space can be whether individuals feel like they're taking on too much responsibility, or they feel, potentially exposed. Yeah. And so that's really where I'm always very clear that, your decision is my decision. I ultimately own this and I trust you to do it. But if this goes wrong, I will make it right. And, you can trust me to do that. And I think that gives people a lot of confidence. Yeah. And again, you find out you have more than confidence than you thought you did. And actually you don't need to come back and get me to unravel it because it's fine. And, most things sort themselves out in the general scheme of things.
Yes. And that sort of sense of safety around creating a safe culture where people can fail within guardrails, fail lightly, and kind of it's safe to do so. But, feeling like someone has your back, it definitely comes up as particularly around sort of leadership and, what people are looking for is clarity, but also that you've got my back, that, if we can stand by stuff. And so one of the sort of concepts that we've explored with kind of teams is around kind of devolving decision making to actually subject matter experts, go and allow decisions to be made where expertise exists within the organisation. So no, you don't need to write a paper to go up to 7 levels about this thing that, we're not experts on. And I wondered kind of in terms of like the actual devolution, is that related, yes, to kind of levels in the organisation, but also kind of actually, the outcome, this outcome better, or you're a subject matter expert.
Oh, completely. I think I've said to you, earlier, I'm a total generalist. So I very rarely have the expertise required for anything. So what I'm doing is giving people a structure and a framework to make those decisions and the confidence to do it, and helping them think about outcomes and sort of beyond their, perhaps go out into the macro a bit more before they make those decisions. So, I currently look after the communications team, the learning team, the exhibitions team, and international. And, there's huge areas there where, I'm constantly learning. But I think it's in my nature to be curious and to explore, and almost by interrogating it, myself, we will get to a good decision. Because I will be asking, all of the stupid questions.
Well, and we're allowed to, right? Like, as you say, and again, showing up as a leader, not being afraid to ask a question that maybe everyone else would know the answer to, but actually it's okay to ask those questions.
Yeah. We had a meeting today about access and inclusion in our exhibitions, and we had a range of people from across the organisation, and they all had like different insights and specialisms and experience. And without all of those 10 voices in the room, we had this incredible picture of what we could do and how we might be able to do it, and what might be most effective, and what we can do in the short term and the long term. And really, it was great to be able to just sit and listen to that meeting, which I did. And to me, that's what leadership can often look like, just listening and taking that away, digesting it, and then thinking, okay, how can I enable these 10 people to do all of this brilliant work?
Yeah. And with kind of that sort of enablement, so some of the kind of big pieces around kind of teams being able to achieve their goals is, what are the blockers? What's stopping you from kind of moving forward? And as a leader, I'm assuming over the last kind of couple of decades, there's been some blockers or challenges that you've had to help kind of move to allow kind of new thinking to happen, or challenging how things have been done. Are there any that sort of stick out that, to you feel like, okay, that was a moment where I was able to clear the pathway for something better or different to happen?
Yeah. I think the most common one is just, we've always done it that way. That it is just people's comfort space, and it requires effort and time to do things differently, and it introduces risk.
Yeah.
And so people aren't incentivized to do things differently. So that's constantly a challenge to relook at how and why we're doing things. I ran a workshop at the end of last year called "What is a Website?" because we're looking at doing a website, and just asking that question of, what do we even need to have this thing? Like, let's go back to first principles. And it's a very design approach to be like, to not accept the status quo, and to challenge, and to have that kind of critical thinking. But I really enjoy, almost like throwing it all up in the air, and it's like, if we started a design museum today, what would we do? What would it look like? We'd never be doing this. It's just something that has evolved as part of our practice. Like, what is this madness? I think as well, if you do that with sort of a bit of humor and a bit of humility, you can help people see that perhaps, although there might be some short-term or even long-term pain, it's really worth changing our practice and our thinking, to embrace whatever future possibility, might be there.
Yeah. And how kind of deeply ingrained is that in this culture of the organisation to sort of question, challenge, and feel able to do that?
I think that's a very good question.
Sorry.
It's a very good question. I think it's quite strong, and I think that does come back to the design kind of nature of the subject. We attract people to the museum who are curious, who are questioning, who are thinking about impact. I was described design as creativity with purpose. So, it's people who are locked into thinking about the kind of why and how can we do this in an imaginative way. So it does feel like there's quite a strong culture. It's a good question I'd like to ask, actually, across the organisation, particularly, at more junior levels. Does everyone feel that they can question and interrogate in a way that I'd like them to?
Yeah, and I think and comes back to your point around showing and telling. And so, when even at Manifesto, we're doing kind of inductions with new starters and, whether people believe it or not, I'm always kind of saying, like, if you see something that looks a bit strange, please don't think that is okay. Yeah. Maybe just say to someone, is there a reason why you do this thing? I don't assume it's set in stone. And even if it's something I designed a process 5 years ago, I'm really not precious. I just want great outcomes. And I think, but that isn't just saying that once, right? You then have to show up multiple times in the business and kind of prove that you are open to even breaking down the things that you kind of authored or designed, and no one's precious here. This is, it's bigger than me or this thing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned curiosity as being a big part of, obviously, the Design Museum and the type of minds that it kind of attracts. How do you kind of stay on top of inspiration, having that curiosity? What does your kind of community or circle of kind of making sure you feel kind of like you've got that inspiration and challenge outside of the organisation?
Yeah. So I do rely quite heavily on designers for this. I mean, the Design Museum's programme is like a constant, being on a constant MA in creative thinking. Designers have such singular ways of understanding the world, and it's such a treat to be able to delve into that, whether it's through an exhibition or a programme or a workshop or producing a piece of work. So really enjoying that the creatives that we have in our orbit is just such a treat. Alongside that, I really enjoy a bit of LinkedIn. I don't know if people can
I'm
still...
I'm here for it.
And if you've got like quite a wide circle of people, the sort of scattergun nature of it quite appeals to me. And there are some people who are just, brilliant at making pronouncements, or they'll just throw a kind of thought bomb out there and you can pick it up or leave it. It feels, I like the sort of random nature of it, and you can sometimes make connections and that kind of thing. So I quite enjoy that. I do try and go to as many sort of conferences as possible. I went to Remix earlier in the year, which was great. Again, it's a kind of generalist paradise, so I enjoyed it. It's a bit of digital, a bit of culture, a bit of, it's a lot. So, and I was there and really enjoyed a presentation from Sheffield University about how they were thinking about AI policies, and it helped me with a kind of breakthrough around developing a values-led AI policy. And it was great. I'm sitting in a room and thinking about it in a different way and being provoked differently, and I've come up with a solution. I love this. So whenever I can, I try and get to conferences, but it's the time is it feels precious. Like such a commitment, doesn't it, for like a whole day or two. So
it feels like a luxury, and definitely I sort of have like 3 or 4 that are like my non-negotiables, and then it's just stuff comes through and you're like, do you know what, actually it's going to a networking breakfast. Do you know what, that 2 hours, if you leave with 1 or 2 either connections or like someone's challenged how you were thinking about something, and particularly you mentioned AI, like absolutely, and we've run a couple of sort of closed room sessions around kind of AI, the impact on how people are engaging with cultural institutes, even planning their visits. Suddenly you ask the question, what is this website? We've been looking at, the impact on how people are, digital behaviours. And so, how much of, like, when you're thinking about the new kind of vision piece and the strategy, the role of technology and how that is kind of evolving, audience behaviours and what they might have access to.
I mean, I think it's something that we're very, very engaged with. We're thinking about how we restructure ourselves to take the opportunity, and what that might look like. I mean, we had a an insight that came back last week in a presentation where for our visitation, Instagram is as strong as word of mouth now. Because word of mouth always traditionally was like, the massive driver that, no one could control. What would this be? And like, that's now for us 50-50 with, there's other obviously drivers as well, but those two are equal. And that's just such, a huge insight and has such profound consequences when you think about how much resource or how dependent we are on one channel, and what that means in our kind of quite uncertain and freebile world. So there's a lot to constantly reflect on and shift. And in fact, we've just put together a digital steering group for the museum with some of our with just a really small group of people to help us just reflect and think and carve out the time to make sure that we're making the right decisions in terms of investment, particularly. And, expectations are always high of the design museum. So we have to, we have to step into that as well. So, we feel that really keenly.
Definitely, definitely the expectation of the design museum is like here, and even, other organizations, you don't get a get out of jail card because you're a charity. Like the digital experience that, when we talk about loyalty and engagement, like they are absolutely comparing you with brands, sectors in other ways, and their expectation is that you can fulfill. But that does require shifts of investment, ways of working, capabilities, platforms, technology. It is kind of a big shift if you want to be audience centric, and there's lots of different ways that people sort of embed that, and there's lots of different audiences. Is the hope that off the back of the audience piece that then helps shape and inform, okay, so what does that mean for, like you say, Instagram content, the type of roles we might need, the skills we might need?
Yeah, very much so. It will be a big piece of work that will help us think about that roadmap. There's always things that your audience are telling you pretty loud and clear anyway. So, we have certain things that, we're very keen to address. But I think it will help us articulate a framework for the lot of the programming digitally that we want to develop.
Amazing. So everyone can be like, okay, we're in the table making a decision. Okay, what's the audience need? And they become part of, whether it's personas or whatever, it's like, okay, they have a seat at the table.
Literally, decisions. We're developing AI personas, so we'll just be able to ask them, say, well, what do you want on Instagram? Which is interesting. I don't think it's going to be, a magic bullet, but I think there's something around when you can use AI for kind of democratization. So at the moment in the organization, there's gatekeepers for insight and research and data. And those people, they don't necessarily want to be gatekeepers, but, because they're constantly having to reply to people's emails saying, oh yeah, I'll send you this, if there were better ways that people could access that information, and if that is through a really simple interface or medium like an AI bot, then great. I want to use technology to empower the team. But we do need to think obviously very clearly about, what is the impact of this environmentally? What is the impact of this in terms of, to make sure that we're not narrowing down options and ideas. Creativity has to underpin our approach. So we need to be very careful with the tools that we use.
Interesting you say about democratization of accessing kind of insights, information, data. That was one of the biggest kind of areas of focus when we kind of polled a number of organisations around AI. And so working with Blood Cancer UK, so we've got sort of a AI wayfinder kind of problem framing kind of solution, and one of the areas that we identified was exactly that. So we have loads of insight and information around the organisation, and rather than you either having to know it or having to go through several people. Let's just make this more available so people can make better informed decisions that are kind of led by data and insight, not by an interpretation of something that they've had third hand.
Yeah. Or just informed. I think I like to make, I like kind of data informed decision. I really respect somebody's right to look at all the data and go, no, I'm not going to do it. Like, the data's telling me this, but I'm going to do something completely different. And this is why. But I think you want to, if it's there, you want someone to have reflected on it and to understood what it might mean. And then, it's open to interpretation as well, isn't it? And different people in different parts of the organisation are going to interpret the same piece of data completely differently. So that becomes interesting as well.
Yeah. And how do you help people shift from data insight to, okay, therefore our hypothesis is this, and here's the sort of a best practice way of kind of validating that, as opposed to, yes, anyway, but I'm just going to do this thing I plan to do anyway. Like, is there, like, in the organisation, does that exist as a way of just helping people kind of use data and then kind of validate, in a sort of slightly more structured way?
I think one of our values at the museum is about impact. So, ultimately that's what we're measuring. And if you measure that well, you can help people make better decisions to make that impact and where they use data and how they use data. So ensuring that you're keeping a very, that you're really understanding that impact and output really helps you take people on that journey, because they know that, what they're doing is of consequence.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important.
Amazing. And I think, like you say, sort of the impact, outcomes, our vision, like all of these things, like it's greater than the sum of those individual parts, everyone feeling collectively part of that. And I'm really excited to kind of maybe hear a little bit more, maybe at the end when I ask your last two questions around the sort of the future vision and what's next for the Design Museum. Yeah. So I have two questions for you. What is your piece of advice for the next generation of leaders coming through in the cultural sector?
I think my advice would be, think about the people around you and how they can help you. Even if you're only in an organisation for quite a short amount of time, you can build relationships and networks that can really serve you a lifetime. And I think when I was younger, I just didn't appreciate how much support and network I had. And I think I was quite casual with it. and so now as I'm old, I wish I'd kind of, younger me had sort of just nurtured that. Yes, nurtured and cultivated that a little bit more. But you are still able to go back and, bring people back in. So I think, just always thinking about that and how you capture that and have that as your counsel, your support network, your opportunity is hugely valuable. And then your second question was, what's next?
What's next for you and
what's
the Design
Museum? Me?
Yeah, so you and the Design Museum, obviously there's 5 strategic kind of objectives.
Yeah, so, we're just about to do this audience piece of work, which is super exciting. Then we've got, a big digital piece of work that's going to be based on that. And then in 2029, it will be the museum's 40th anniversary. Wow. So we're going to re-display our collection on the top floor, which we haven't done since we opened in Kensington 10 years ago. So that's a kind of massive rethink for the museum in terms of, again, what is design? What is a collection? Who is this for? Some big fundamental ideas that we're working through. And again, I think we're going to have an incredible design team. We're appointing them in the moment. So we're going to have some incredible minds working on that display. So that feels like it's going to really help distill a lot of thinking in the museum. So we hope that sort of audience, digital, and then collection pieces, will be really, again, sort of another layer of transformation. for the museum.
And it's great to almost have a milestone that you can sort of realise a strategic vision and ambition through, which you don't always get in an organisation.
I mean, we had that with the opening of the Design Museum in Kensington. And I think that was actually a lesson that I really learned, that, you know, we had so much focus on opening day one, like just getting that building funded and open and running was such a monumental piece of work. Like, even when I look back at it now, I just think, wow, I can't believe we did that with so few people. But you actually need a plan for, you know, post day one. And that is actually, if not even more important. So now when I'm working on projects, you know, I think about that milestone of like opening or delivering or launching. But actually, what does the next 3, 6 months, year look like, and how are we going to resource that, and you know, how are we going to make that as compelling as possible? And that's been a huge lesson for me, because I love to do new things. I love to start things, and I have to really discipline myself to be like, you've got to think about the long tail here and how that is going to be sustained. So there's a lot of thinking about, you know, post 2029 as well, and you know, what that then looks like for the next 10 years.
Wow. Josephine, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing. I feel like actually I now want to talk a little bit more about, you know, 2029 and all of this stuff, but and operationalizing strategies, which is when the sweaty hard stuff comes. We've got the vision now. We're like, oh my, what's the plan? And that is, and how we're going to measure, how do we know what success looks like? But that's a whole nother podcast episode, or maybe a panel event. I'll leave that to Nicola to decide what I'm committing us to. But thank you so much. I've loved spending time with you, and thank you for sharing and being so open with everyone.
Well, thank you, Lee. It's been great.